The Supreme Court has agreed to hear 3 cases involving President Trump's financial and tax records. 2 of them are related to demands from House committees that President Trump's banks and accountants turn over his financial records.
The other comes out of Manhattan, where a prosecutor is using a grand jury subpoena to demand similar records. Justices will rule on whether a sitting president, be it President Trump or a future leader, can keep those records private. For more on this, Ilya Shapiro joins us over the telephone. He's a director for the Robert A. Levy Center for Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute. So, Ilya, why were these demands by the House and a New York City prosecutor filed to begin with?
Well, that is the $64,000 question, and that's ultimately what the Supreme Court will have to decide. Because if it's a legitimate investigation by the DA of criminal wrongdoing or violations of disclosure laws by the Trump Foundation or related entities, then that's acceptable. And similarly, if the House is actually pursuing legislation about the emoluments that presidents receive or financial disclosure laws, things like that, those are legitimate legislative purposes. On the other hand, the president's lawyers are, of course, arguing that this is a fishing expedition, an attempt to persecute and slander the president in various ways. So that's really what the whole case turns on. The legal and the kind of practical significance are one and the same. Are these legitimate requests, or are they just legal attacks on the president?
Ilya, I feel like the law, the New York law that demanded that the president sort of have his documents being handed over. Sorry, I'm fuddling up my words, but I feel like that law was passed just a few months ago, and it's already at the Supreme Court. Were these cases fast-tracked to the Supreme Court?
Well, I think the judges that were entertaining them, the district judges and then the Court of Appeals, were certainly taking them seriously. I don't think there was some expedited motions or anything like that, but the judges clearly see this as a significant issue. And after all, there's no need for a trial. It's all decided on the papers, kind of straightforward issues, complicated or hard to decide, but not technically challenging in terms of fact finding and what have you. And so it's not unusual for the court to then take up this case. And of course, they're not going to hear argument until March, and the decision's probably in June. So it still takes some time.
Okay.
So, Ilya, how did these cases make their way up to the Supreme Court?
The subpoenas went out from the New York DA's office and from the House committee, and the president resisted them, meaning filed a motion to quash the subpoenas in court, and at that point the court started investigating.
So he had promised to release his tax returns during his 2016 campaign. He'd been fighting those efforts all along to obtain that information. You may not have any insight into this, but I'm wondering, will the court, in deciding this case, find out why the president has not wanted to disclose this information?
I doubt it. I mean, that's really a political question. Does it look good or does it look bad that he, promised it and then didn't do it? Should all presidential candidates release their tax returns? Those are, valid questions for public debate, but I don't think that does anything for the legal dispute.
But thus far, have attorneys representing the president provided any sort of counter-argument?
Well, they've invoked 2 things, really. Executive privilege, that is, that a lot of things are communications by the president in a sensitive way, that the disclosure thereof would impede the functioning of the government, of the executive branch. But stronger than that, I think, is their claim, in this case, not in other subpoenas, about the testimony of executive branch officials. But with regard to his financial records, I think the strongest argument they're making is that this is a fishing expedition and you don't just get unlimited subpoenas to look at whatever you want, and this really isn't related to either official House oversight for legislative purposes or some legitimate criminal investigation by the DA.
So, Ilya, I know this is sort of speculative, but given that the president has already refused the Congress and their requests for his financial records, in other words, the constitutional authority that Congress has within its purview to check the president and to make formal requests of the executive branch, could we potentially see President Trump refuse the Supreme Court if the ruling does not go his way?
I doubt it. He's not refused to comply with any orders that have gone against him this far on various areas, whether personally or as a matter of policy. And we need to be clear that these cases, these financial record cases, are different than the ones involving the subpoenas of Don McGahn, the former general counsel, and Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff, and all these other officials, whether impeachment related or otherwise, that have been subpoenaed by congressional committees. Those are indeed investigating, I guess, public actions and what have you. This seems like a much closer call about really whether the House has a legitimate interest.
So two of the president's nominees, Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch, they're on the Supreme Court. Could that have an impact on the outcome of this case?
Well, I don't think they are going to rule out of loyalty to the president or anything like that. You have to look at what their views of executive power is and the scope of governmental investigation. Justice Gorsuch, for example, is very skeptical of prosecutors and other law enforcement officials kind of digging into people's lives and potential violation of the Fourth Amendment and privacy concerns, things like that. So you could have them voting in different ways. Of course, Chief Justice Roberts wants to have the court rule with one voice if possible. So he would love to have some narrow, unanimous ruling saying you can look at this but not that, and everything has to be under seal. You can't make it public, something like that. So I don't think you can say that Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are going to be together and strongly for the president any more than you can guarantee that they're going to be just like the other conservatives or anyone else. There's a lot going on here.
All right. Yeah, that's the perfect end to that. There's a lot going on here. Ilya Shapiro, thank you very much.
Thank you.